My name is Paul Wilson. I'm a Senior HMI from Ofsted. I am the Link Senior HMI for Suffolk and also Norfolk as well. So I do have regular contact with the local authorities about various inspection matters. And as we saw from before, I'm going to get to do the Patrick Vallance bit of saying next slide, please. So that information there is always on our presentations. What I would hope you do is definitely share the information that you get from my session today so that you can share that across your schools and trusts as well. So this is what I'm hoping to cover in this session. Safeguarding is at the heart of what you do in schools, and it's an important part of Ofsted's work. Judgments about safeguarding carry great weight and are never made lightly. It's a complex judgment, and it requires us as inspectors to balance a broad range of relevant evidence. How we evaluate safeguarding is set out in the School Inspection Handbook, and that is from paragraph 392 to 412 in the one that was published in September. So in the handbook, we've updated some aspects to further clarify our approach to inspecting safeguarding, particularly around judging safeguarding as either effective or ineffective, and what that means as to whether a school is placed in a category of concern. The messages about how we evaluate safeguarding are broadly the same as they've always been. What we've tried to do is make sure that we've expanded the information for transparency, both for inspectors and for schools. And safeguarding is not a graded judgment. It's either effective or ineffective. Keeping children safe in education sets out clearly the requirements for schools to keep children safe, and inspectors use that when they're considering safeguarding. However, inspecting safeguarding isn't just about compliance. It's much more than that. What really matters is the practice on the ground. On inspection, we evaluate the culture of safeguarding and how well leaders have established that. We're looking at practice and impact. On this slide, you can see there's no formula that brings us to a judgment about safeguarding. There are lots of things we consider. And we have to consider the evidence available in order to get us to a rounded view. Central to this is how policy, training, and practice contributes to the culture of safeguarding in a school. And we've updated our definition of safeguarding cultures. We talk about an open and positive culture of safeguarding. And on the slide, I've captured some of the new language from the handbook and say there's that emphasis on having an open and positive culture. And again, paragraph 392 of the School Inspection Handbook goes into more depth about what that might look like. In writing this definition, we've taken some of the work that the Care Quality Commission have done on closed cultures. Colleagues in CQC found that people are more likely to be at risk of harm, whether that's deliberate or unintentional, where people can't speak up for themselves or for others. Staff aren't supported or encouraged to report concerns and raise concerns, and managers fail to engage or respond to recommendations from external agencies. Staff are poorly inducted and trained. And so our definition rightly emphasises these aspects of practice. And it concludes by setting out the importance of schools being receptive to challenge and reflecting on their practice. So again, this is another way of looking at the things that contribute to a safeguarding culture in a school. I'll just pick out a couple to highlight. In terms of that grey oval at the top, policy, systems and analysis. Getting these right is important because it ensures that staff know how to speak out, and in turn it ensures that leaders know what's happening on the ground and are keeping things under continuous review. Training and recruitment, the yellow oval, are also key. Thinking back again to the findings of the CQC project and our own work in terms of retrieval from evidence bases, staff must be properly trained so they understand their responsibilities, and in this way they can identify concerns and schools can ensure that they get pupils the necessary help. A school with an open and positive safeguarding culture is likely to have a firm grasp on all of those aspects that you can see on the slide. So in terms of the principles, it's not just a tick list approach. Effective safeguarding, as I've said, is more than just compliance. We use the School Inspection Handbook and Keeping Children Safe in Education as our guide. And importantly, we'll consider the school's culture of safeguarding and those things about leaders' openness, their challenge, the scrutiny, their evaluation, and how they listen to others' views and their actions, and how they respond and learn lessons from incidents. This slide and the next one show some of the activities that we carry out on inspection that give us insights into safeguarding. When we meet with the DSL, we check whether there have been any serious safeguarding incidents or allegations about staff and what action was taken. We'll sample files, discuss referrals, and explore decision-making and the rigour with which concerns have been pursued when they've been passed on. We'll choose the cases to look at once we're in school from discussions with you and looking at your records, so there's no need to prepare case studies for us. We'll ask how you recruit safely. This includes looking at your single central record. We'll see what recruitment checks have been done and that leaders understand what they're checking and that these are recorded on the single central record and that this reflects a rigorous culture that leaders have established. Any minor errors on the single central record can be corrected during the course of the inspection. We'll always do those two activities on the first day of an inspection because that gives us time to rectify any errors and explore any things that may arise. We weave safeguarding through our inspection activities. We pay careful attention to evidence from staff in discussions with them, pupils, parents, and other partners, including any alternative provision that the school might use. So, for example, we'll ask pupils about how safe they feel in school. What would they do if they had a concern about themselves or someone else? How they learn about keeping themselves safe, whether that's online or in other situations. We're thinking about how the school enables pupils to know and be safe and pass on concerns when they have them. We'll ask staff about their understanding of the signs of potential abuse and the procedures that they follow when they've got concerns about a pupil or a member of staff. We speak to governors, we check on governors and how they ensure and assure themselves that safeguarding is effective. And through those discussions, we'll explore different safeguarding themes, such as child and child abuse, sexual harassment and violence, children missing in education, the prevent duty. In terms of vulnerable pupils, we know that pupils with SEND, for example, are more open to harm, and that we check that there's an understanding of the particular sensitivities and safeguarding issues in a particular area or school, and that leaders are alert to those. And through all of those activities, you'll be able to show us the culture of safeguarding that you've established in your school. So if we think of the other side of the coin, what might be the reasons for ineffective safeguarding? And again, we're going to draw on what we found from retrieval work in terms of looking at evidence bases where safeguarding has been found to be ineffective. The School Inspection Handbook also outlines what may lead to ineffective safeguarding, and that's in paragraph 410 and 411. So on this slide, you can see how ineffective safeguarding is described in the School Inspection Handbook. Not surprisingly, it's the opposite end of that open culture and positive culture that we've discussed. We go further in the handbook to exemplify some of the reasons that might contribute to serious concerns. In the handbook, it says that ineffective safeguarding will always mean that a school is placed in a formal category of concern. From this term, we're taking a different approach. In the rare cases where safeguarding is judged as ineffective, but all other key judgments are good or better. In these cases, if inspectors evaluate that the weaknesses that have led to ineffective safeguarding can be rectified within 3 months, we'll suspend the inspection, not publish the report, and send a letter to the school and the appropriate authority outlining the weaknesses in safeguarding, and inspectors will return to the school within 3 months. If, when they return, the evidence suggests safeguarding is effective at this time, the inspection will conclude and the report will be published. In instances where safeguarding is ineffective and at least one other judgment requires improvement or inadequate, the school will be placed in a category of concern and the report will be published. So an important aspect is for inspectors to weigh up the evidence that they gather when safeguarding, evaluating safeguarding. Effective safeguarding does not mean perfection. Weighing up inspection evidence to reach any judgment always requires careful thought. On the slide are just a few aspects that inspectors told us can be complex when inspecting a school's safeguarding arrangements. If leaders in a school fail to promote equality or fail to fulfil their duties in relation to the protected characteristics, that may contribute to evidence for the personal development judgment, but it may also reflect in the team's judgment about the effectiveness of safeguarding arrangements. So we need to think about it in the round and where one judgment might impact on another. We'll talk about behaviour in a moment. Record keeping needs considering carefully and in context. Schools vary in size and structure, and their record systems are very likely to be different. Electronic record keeping isn't automatically better than paper records. It depends on what's recorded and how the records are used. If some weaker practice is found around record keeping, safeguarding might still be effective, but with a next step or an area for improvement to address. In situations such as these, we need to establish whether leaders understood the risk to the child, took swift action when concerns arose to keep that child safe. The key question is constantly, are pupils at increased risk as a result of the way in which concerns are recorded? When considering referrals, we look at the bigger picture. Do leaders demonstrate an awareness of what might suggest a child is at risk and why they need additional support? Are leaders suitably proactive in reaching out to the local authority for advice? Are they familiar with locally agreed thresholds? And if they're concerned about the LA's actions, and that then maybe not in the best interests of the child, do they pursue extra help or escalate their concerns? Exploring all of these aspects helps inspectors get beneath the surface and understand the extent to which there's a strong culture of safeguarding in the school. Above all, and taking all evidence into consideration, we must carefully consider if any of the issues we find are serious enough to warrant placing a school in a category of concern and saying that safeguarding is ineffective. So if we consider briefly how poor behaviour and reports of it may impact on the safeguarding judgment or not. This can be an area that causes a little bit of confusion for inspectors and for schools. If pupils feel unsafe because of the poor behaviour of other pupils, that's not necessarily a safeguarding issue, but it will likely influence the judgment for behaviour and attitudes. However, if pupils feel unsafe because leaders do not protect them from harm, this is more likely to impact on the safeguarding judgment. So, for example, if pupils report feeling unsafe on the playground because other pupils push them when they're using the play equipment, in and of itself, that wouldn't be a safeguarding concern. Although we might want to explore things like levels of supervision and how alert leaders are to risks and poor standards of behaviour and how to manage that. On the other hand, if pupils reported that they didn't feel safe in certain parts of the school because of other pupils' inappropriate behaviour and poor supervision, that would be more likely to be a safeguarding concern. For instance, if there were stairwells that pupils avoided because they said they were inappropriately touched by others, and in particular, if leaders were not aware of these danger zones and pupils didn't report concerns because they weren't confident that adults would deal with them or take them seriously or act on what they've been told, then that would likely impact on the safeguarding judgment. And in terms of attendance, there's an important distinction to be drawn between higher than normal levels of absence and not knowing the whereabouts of pupils. If schools are doing all they reasonably can to respond to any high levels of absence, we'll judge them favourably in terms of safeguarding. However, if schools don't know where vulnerable children are and aren't taking basic actions to secure attendance and ensure that children are safe and well, then that's a different matter. So it's important to consider the context of any evidence that we have about behaviour and attendance and how that may impact on safeguarding. So we will unpick the language of minor improvements, but let's sort of at the moment pin down the statutory expectations around the single central record. We had a national safeguarding duty desk in operation last year, and this is now continuing and is something that's going to continue going forward in Ofsted. And that National Safeguarding Duty Desk helped us really hone some training that we've given to inspectors around their understanding of the single central record. It's one of the first pieces of evidence we collect during an inspection, and that happens early on day one, as I've said, because one, safeguarding is such an important aspect of the school's work, but two, if there are any minor issues, you've got the time to correct them. Sometimes checking that single central record can be seen just as a compliance check. You know, are you doing what it says in the statutory guidance? But it's got the potential to tell us so much more. For example, about leaders' understanding of their legal duties, staff training, and governors' monitoring and understanding. The single central record is an indicator of whether leaders understand safe recruitment practice and carry it out well. It contains the most important checks that schools make about the suitability of staff. And sadly, we know from things that have happened over time that some predatory people do want to work in schools and join the staff. The murders committed in Soham in 2002 and the resulting Bishard inquiry are illustrations of this. Checks that are undertaken are a safety mechanism for preventing children in the school from very serious harm. We deliberately look at the single central record early on, as I said, because we want plenty of time to follow up any issues that may arise. It also gives the school time to resolve any minor administrative issues, and it's helpful to let leaders know about the reasons for why we look at the single central record early on. So, you know, hopefully, if your school's inspected, the inspectors will tell you we're looking at this early on for these reasons. It can sometimes be tempting to look beyond what's legally required and use self-made checklists to tick off what's on the single central record. This is well intended but carries risk. If you expect the single central record to contain more than is legally required, inspectors may be going beyond the legal framework for inspection and also help perpetuate myths about what's required. By using a checklist, we risk being not aware of when requirements change and of limiting the quality of our evidence by not looking beyond compliance. So inspectors are always using the latest version of Keeping Children Safe in Education as their reference point on inspection. And the School Inspection Handbook also sets out more clearly than previously what is required on the single central record. Okay, so a little bit of interactive things here. So, and this is going to be a few clicks as well. So, the first one, if we can have the first click, please. True or false? There has to be a separate SCR for each academy within a multi-academy trust. Can you just put your hand up if you think that is true? It's actually false. MATs can have one single central record for all of their schools, as long as the details for an individual school that's been inspected are easily accessible. So, you know, filter it, whatever, so just so that the inspector can view. True or false? Maintained school governors do not need to be included on the SCR. It is actually true. They don't have to be on the SCR, but they do have to have particular checks. An enhanced DBS check and a section 1 to 8 check. But there's no requirement that those checks are recorded on the single central record. Inspectors will ask how you know that those checks have been carried out, but they don't need to be on the single central record. Okay. Disqualification by association. Does that need to be on the SCR, true or false? So who thinks that's true? It's false. These checks related to staff being disqualified from working in school because they lived with someone who had been convicted of a relevant crime, but they haven't been required in schools since September 2018. What schools must do is ensure that anyone who's employed to work in an early years class or provide wraparound childcare for children under 8 has not been disqualified under the Childcare Act. That's not the same as disqualification by association. Again, true or false? Put your hand up if you think that one's true. DBS checks for all staff should be rechecked regularly. It's false. Staff employed before DBS checks were introduced in May 2006 aren't required to have a DBS check. They just need the checks that were required by the relevant legislation at the point they were appointed. There's also no requirement for schools to recheck DBSs or expect employees to sign up to the DBS update service. The SCR doesn't need to include details of references obtained for staff. It's true. You don't need to have the references there. Obviously, you do, take your references, but it doesn't have to be on the single central record. Okay. We don't routinely, on inspection, look at personnel files or check references either. That's not necessary. We may do it if a check is missing, just to see that actual checks are carried out, but it's not something that would be routinely done by inspectors. So we'd only do it if we're following up something very specific. Full details of when the checks are carried out. That one's true. I can see people nodding. So, yeah. Some schools also say who did the check, but that isn't required. Okay. But we do need to see that the detail of when it was carried out is recorded, just the date. Does that have to be on the single central record? It doesn't have to be. Lots of schools do put it on there or have it somewhere, but it doesn't have to be. Okay. It's not a requirement in keeping children safe. And we won't view schools more favourably if they have chosen to do that. Okay, so the written record that staff have read and understood KICSI, and sometimes governors are included in that as well. Okay, true or false? It is false. You don't have to have that. And actually having that record that's saying somebody's actually read it, do they understand it? Do they know what to do? Okay. What we'd be asking is, do you know that? And prohibition from teaching checks that only need to be carried out for qualified teachers, true or false? Okay. And again, it's one that sometimes comes up on inspection, both queried by inspectors and by school leaders as well. The answer is it's false. Prohibition from teaching checks apply to anyone who's employed to carry out teaching work. And the definition of teaching work includes planning and preparing lessons, delivering lessons to pupils, assessing and reporting on pupils' development, progress and attainment. And so if you think about it, in some schools, that may be something that extends beyond your qualified teachers. Some of your higher level teaching assistants or teaching assistants may be doing some of those things when working with pupils. So for us, it's helpful to talk to leaders about who they carry out those checks for and why. It doesn't apply to all teaching assistants. It depends on people's role. Section 128 checks are required for governors of maintained schools. True or false? It is true. Section 128 is a direction that prohibits someone from participating in the management of an independent school, including a free school or academy. We need to check if a 128 check has been carried out on those in leadership and management positions in schools. Section 128 check isn't needed for other staff and volunteers in any type of school. Unsuitable people are not allowed to be governors of maintained schools, and that's why that check should be carried out for governors in maintained schools. So we will check that governors have been subject to a 128 check in maintained schools, but we don't expect to see that on the single central record, remember. Right, thank you. So in terms of safeguarding that's effective, but there could be minor improvements, the slide sets out some of the things that we have to bear in mind. If we put it simply, we know there are situations where things aren't perfect, but pupils aren't at serious risk of harm. If that's the situation, we can feel it necessary to outline the areas that could be improved in the inspection report, but still judge safeguarding to be effective. As the slide says, those areas will have little or no impact on children, and they will not indicate wider cultural issues. In these situations, we want to be satisfied that the school can address the areas quickly. On the slide it says ideally before the end of the inspection, but there might reasonably be a situation where leaders need a little bit longer. But we're satisfied that the school has taken steps to resolve the matters. So, for example, governors need to ratify an out-of-date policy, or you might need to arrange some additional training for staff, and that might not be something you can do before the end of the inspection. If we do say that safeguarding is effective, but there are some minor improvements required, that doesn't stop leadership and management being good or better. That's because the overall culture hasn't undermined that we're satisfied there's capacity to deal with things quickly. Okay, so again, some schools think that, we're going to get an area for improvement around safeguarding. That's going to impact on the leadership and management judgment. It's going to be requires improvement. That's not the case. It can be good or better because safeguarding is still effective. And you'd probably expect me to say that getting a second professional opinion is important in those cases, and in circumstances where the lead inspector thinks that there may be a minor improvement required, they will be calling the duty desk to discuss those. But again, that's nothing to be concerned about. And these just go through some of the things that may be minor improvements. So for that second bullet point, it might be clear that staff can tell us about the steps they're taking to safeguard pupils, but those actions aren't fully reflected in records. We might come across an isolated incident of a concern not being referred to the local authority. Obviously, we want to be quickly assured that the school has taken preventative actions and what they're doing to keep that pupil safe. But if that wasn't a sign of a more widespread issue in terms of securing help, it wouldn't necessarily undermine the whole judgment around safeguarding. And finally, some gaps in the single central record. If they can be easily addressed, then that is not going to lead to ineffective safeguarding. It may lead to a minor improvement. Given the size of some staff bodies, changing population of some schools, things can occasionally get missed. We'd be happy for leaders to put this right, and again, so long as it wasn't a sign of something wider where a whole host of checks weren't being done, that wouldn't undermine safeguarding being effective. So hopefully you realise that the head teacher's worries in this case not necessarily grounded in what will happen. Okay, a gap might be there for many reasons. A DBS check might not have come through for a new member of staff. Okay, in these cases we'll always ask about why, what the situation is, what leaders have done in the meantime while they're waiting for that DBS to come through, and we'll always give time to rectify any minor errors. We'd obviously talk to the head teacher to let them know about the gaps, and so that they know and can check on the welfare of the business manager as well in this case. They'll probably arrange to go back later in terms of the inspectors when leaders have had some time to find out what the issue was and rectify it, or tell us about the steps they've taken if a DBS hadn't come through. So the single central record's an insight, or one insight into the culture of how safely leaders recruit new staff. Okay, we just want to know that you do this safely, and it's part of knowing what the different checks mean. And so in terms of reporting on safeguarding, if safeguarding is effective and there are no minor improvements, all the report says now is that safeguarding is effective. No further texts included or required. So leaders may read about examples in previous reports of examples of best or effective practice and decide to replicate things in their own setting. If the practice is already effective, that may well be unnecessary, might not be relevant to the context of the school, and might inadvertently add to workload. So that's the rationale for not having additional text in when safeguarding is effective and there are no minor improvements. If there is effective safeguarding but with minor improvements, the report will need to explain why this is. We will do this in the safeguarding section of the report. Other than in very exceptional circumstances, though, we're unlikely to include information about minor improvements in the first two sections of the report, about what it's like to attend the school, and what the school does well and what it could improve. And in those instances where safeguarding is ineffective, then, and the report is published to say that that's the case, the report will make very clear, including in the opening section about what it's like to attend the school, why safeguarding is effective. We won't wait until we get to the safeguarding section of the report to mention it. Otherwise, parents who only read the opening section won't realise there's an issue. And obviously, there'll always be a next step or area for improvement for any school where safeguarding is being judged to be ineffective. So if you just have a look at what's on the slide and say we do listen to parents' views. Sometimes concerns are brought to our attention during an inspection, so for example by a parent. In this case, it was a parent approaching a team inspector at the school gates at the start of the day and said that their child had been inappropriately touched in the toilets. The parents said they'd reported it to leaders, but it wasn't taken seriously. Leaders said that that sort of thing doesn't happen in the school. In the meeting with the DSL, exploring the approaches to the school dealing with peer-on-peer abuse. And the DSL is a little bit vague and says they've never really had to deal with it. So let's just look at some things that come through. We've got that opening scenario. The lead inspector looks at record keeping, and there are no incidents of peer-on-peer abuse recorded. Staff spoke to children involved in the incident because there was a record of it in a behaviour incident, and the child denied it. Okay. In parent view, several parents raised concerns about leaders not dealing with bullying when it happens. Some of their children do not want to come to school because they don't feel safe. Inspectors speak to pupils about whether they feel safe in school. Several pupils say they don't feel safe because when they tell teachers about things like bullying, name-calling and problems at home, Teachers don't do anything about it. Inspectors talk to teachers about what they do when pupils report concerns, for example, not feeling safe at school and issues that have happened at home. Teachers know how to report concerns to the DSL. They say sometimes they don't do this if they think the issue isn't serious. We just keep an eye on it. And the lead inspector asks for records of bullying incidents from the school. The head teacher says we don't have any records because bullying doesn't happen. They say children sometimes fall out, but it's dealt with by teachers and they don't write it down. With those pieces of evidence that came together, the inspection team judged safeguarding to be ineffective. It was a result of the totality of that evidence. Safeguarding is ineffective when there are serious or widespread failures in the school's safeguarding arrangements that give us cause for concern because children are not protected and statutory requirements are not being met, or because insufficient action is being taken to remedy weaknesses following a serious failure of safeguarding arrangements. No one piece of evidence would lead to that judgment. It's the connection of the evidence that gives it the weighting. The point here is that the issues are cultural and widespread. It wasn't a one-off case. There seems to be a culture of not taking allegations seriously on many fronts, i.e. bullying, potential abuse, and it doesn't happen here view. Staff appear to be desensitised and dismissive. All of that would lead to inspectors coming to a judgment that safeguarding is ineffective. If we imagine another school where we start with the same piece of information, the report of inappropriate touching and the DSL being vague about recording and responding to incidents of child-on-child sexual abuse. Inspectors complete the same activities in the previous scenario. So if we can just click through all of the slides, please. So we've got those. This time, however, the evidence they gather leads to a different conclusion, that safeguarding was likely to be effective. So in this case, when the team looked at safeguarding records, there were no incidents of child-on-child harmful sexual behaviour being recorded or inappropriate touching. However, there were detailed records of other safeguarding concerns raised by staff and pupils, and evidence that staff took those concerns seriously and leaders took timely and appropriate action. The incident that was raised was documented, but there was no mention by the parent of inappropriate touching. The complainant's concerns were about behaviour. In the parent survey, the majority of parents said their children felt safe at school and raised no concerns. Some parents, 2 or 3, mentioned concerns about leaders not dealing with bullying effectively. Inspectors spoke with several groups of pupils about whether they felt safe in school, and most said that teachers listened to them and that most teachers dealt with bullying incidents when they occurred. Again, a couple said that when they'd been bullied, they told the teacher and they felt the teacher hadn't done anything about it. Inspectors spoke to teachers about what they do when pupils report concerns. Teachers said that they keep records of concerns and it helps to build a picture of what's happening with individuals. Teachers said they hadn't had a lot of training about peer-on-peer abuse beyond what they'd had on bullying generally. And when the lead inspector looked at records of bullying incidents, the records were detailed and showed that bullying was dealt with and appropriate action was taken. There was a record of the concern raised by the parent, and appropriate action appeared to have been taken given what the leaders knew at the time of that concern being raised. So when looked at a whole, the evidence would show no significant weaknesses in the arrangements of safeguarding. The inspection team, in this case, judged safeguarding to be effective, but they did have a next step about the approach to managing alleged incidents of peer-on-peer abuse. And the leader fed back to the head teacher that a small number of staff might need more training in how to respond to bullying. If the inspection team had stopped at the first 2 pieces of evidence and not continued to collect and consider what the evidence said, the outcome for the school may well have been very different, and that wouldn't have been an accurate judgment about the effectiveness of safeguarding. And I think it's important to note that in the vast majority of schools we inspect, safeguarding is effective. So this is what we consider when we evaluate the evidence we gather around safeguarding. We need to make sure that we are proportionate in working out the facts and whether there's a wider issue or not. So, for example, we'll consider, is the evidence telling us that leaders know about the issue or not, and are they acting appropriately? Is the evidence indicative of wider issues that affect many pupils, and does the evidence fit with the overall picture of the school? Should the evidence impact on the effectiveness of safeguarding, or is it that something could be even better? So hopefully you'll take from this that we do go beyond, is a school being compliant, and we evaluate the culture of safeguarding. Ineffective safeguarding is rarely about a single issue, unless that's a very serious one. Safeguarding is a complex judgment, and it goes far beyond compliance with statutory requirements. It's about how everybody works together to develop that open and positive culture where everyone feels safe and is well cared for. Safeguarding, remember, is a binary judgment. It's either effective or ineffective. Safeguarding can be effective with minor improvements. The deciding factor for us is whether those issues are serious and widespread. If they are, safeguarding is ineffective. Where safeguarding is ineffective, it's important that we clearly report on the reasons why, right from the very start of the inspection report. Thank you. It's really down to the school to think about who's the best person to do that. Going back to my experience when I was on the other side of the fence, I always got somebody in the office to navigate people through it, because I was always worried about deleting an important line or something like that. But I think it's thinking about, you know, what do we do? Quite often what we'll do is check the single central record, and in 99% of the cases, everything's there that should be, and then we'll ask things about, okay, who would know about the governors having the section 1 to 8 check, for example? And the business manager might say, oh yes, I've got a record of that, or they might say, you need to speak to a particular leader, so we'd do that. I think it's important that, and again, if you're unsure as leaders, to ask the lead inspector in the conversation, because they'll put the timetable together, working with you, just saying, actually, what would be helpful for the inspector to get the evidence that they want from that. And quite often we'll sometimes follow things up about safe recruitment with governors, and quite often we don't, or trustees, and quite often we don't see them until day 2. But we do know from having checked through, actually those checks are taking place. So, then sometimes just asking governors about how do you assure yourselves that the checks take place, and how many of you are safe recruitment trained, for example, to know that they're following those procedures. Okay. No, there was no need for them ever to look at it, unless they wanted to follow up a particular issue where, there seem to be some checks missing from the single central record. Can you just show us that, examples that those checks have been carried out? Sometimes, again, on inspection, there's maybe something being missing, a date for when a DBS check was carried out. And sometimes, again, you have the business manager rooting through files, wanting to show you it's there. There's no need for them to do that, unless they need to follow up something that's missing from the single central record. Okay, and that is something that we have impressed on inspectors as well. Right, so it's you can carry out the check just to see if there's been a prohibition order by looking at the, it used to be the GTC website, and I can't remember what it is now. There is a check you can see if any individuals had a prohibition order made against them. But the key thing is thinking about, actually, is that person involved in what is defined by teaching. So are they planning lessons, delivering lessons? Are they making assessments on staff, on pupils rather, about their progress, personal development, attainment as well? Okay, so it's thinking about whether what the activity they're doing fits with that. So that may well depend on things as well. So it may be that if, you know, there's a suggestion that some things haven't been passed on to local authority designated officer, for example, or not in a timely fashion, we may ask to speak to the lad, or it may be that we just ask to, you know, is there someone we can speak to about a particular referral you've made about a pupil? But again, quite often the local authority representatives can give us some support with that, and say local authority representative, because obviously whether you're an academy or a maintained school, it's the local authority who've got responsibility around safeguarding as well. Okay. So I say there's difference between pupils at schools where you've got higher rates of absence and schools not knowing when pupils are. So it's actually thinking about, okay, how does the school assure themselves that a pupil who's not in school is safe? And so, you know, you may have first day calling protocols in place. It's those kinds of things that we'd want to know about how you know that pupil's safe. It's if pupils attending alternative provision on certain days, for example, how do you know that a pupil is attending when they're supposed to? What arrangements have you got in place for that information to be passed on and shared? Okay. Yeah. So I think it's, you know, you're seeking references, not getting them through. Our question would be, so actually what do you do to kind of risk assess before you've got a reference through, or if you don't get a reference through, what procedures you've got in place to try and make sure that you have assurances. And again, the key thing is actually on the reference, are you asking the key question about, you know, have there been any safeguarding concerns about this individual in a previous, you know, employment? Any concerns about that this person shouldn't be working with children and young people? Okay. Okay. I think it's having what you've got in place to escalate with the local authority, showing you following that. There are obviously whistleblowing procedures as well, which you can use and contact Ofsted if you've got concerns about particular arrangements in local authorities as well. On school inspections, we're obviously inspecting the school and its arrangements for safeguarding, not the local authority. So all we want assurances of is you can show us that you're trying to escalate them, you're trying to get the relevant help as well. So I think it is, you know, raising it with the local authority, and I say you can raise it with us as well. And obviously our children's social care inspections are looking about, you know, make those judgments about how well the local authority protects young people. We may say, can you talk us through a recent referral that you've made to children's services? We may talk about, can you show us a recent low-level concern that you've had, and again show us the records of that child to see, you know, is it a one-off, or actually are you building up a picture of young people's experiences as well. And we'll do that in, quite often in discussion with you, because sometimes, again, people are very keen to show us the work that they're doing, and then sometimes they'll be able to say, oh, and there's another one I can show you, and I would always say, please feel free to. But, if we do say, no, that's fine, we don't want to say any more, again, that's probably because we're reassured by things. So again, don't, get concerned if, well, I didn't want to look at that. It's probably that we've got reassurance. And again, one of the things we've always said is when you have enough evidence to, give yourself assurances that safeguarding is, effective, then know when enough is enough, because you could keep looking for everything, and you could do a whole 2 days just looking at safeguarding. I think the other thing to bear in mind is we do ask for information about pupils who are open to children's social care, etc., to be available at the start of the inspection. That doesn't have to be a list printed off. It's available to inspectors from 8 o'clock. And again, quite often we'll say, all right, in the meeting with the DSL, can you just have that information ready? And again, that's sometimes where we say, actually, can you just talk me through that young person? No, definitely not. What you use in the day-to-day running of the school. You don't need to produce case studies or anything like that. It's just show us what you've got. And inspectors will ask for certain things, and in terms of this is the information that needs to be available, it can be in any format whatsoever. One of the examples we had was, you can share with us your summary of your self-evaluation, should you wish to do so. That can be in any format whatsoever. I can genuinely say I once got it in. This is in the genre of a fairy story about my school, and it was quite nice to read, actually, because it was something slightly different to what you normally see. But it told me what it needed to do. So in terms of where the school judged itself, its context, etc., as well. So no, don't produce anything for us. And if inspectors ask you for anything in particular, then just direct them to the fact that they shouldn't be doing that. And you all will get, when you have a phone call from Ofsted, which will now be on a Monday and before 1 o'clock, you all will be given a number where you can contact a senior inspector in the region if you've got any queries, questions, concerns, and that number's available right until 5 days after you've had the draft report as well. Okay, so feel free to use that. Okay. Well, thank you.